afternoon, good morning to those on the West Coast. I'm Rabbi Jenny Rosen, founder and CEO of Dayenu, and it's really my pleasure to welcome you to this briefing on Dayenu's new report, With All Our Might, How Jewish Institutions Can Invest in a Just, Clean Energy Future. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. First, if you need them, you can turn on auto captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're doing this briefing in webinar format, and we're keeping the chat off just to reduce distractions. So if you have a technical issue, you can still chat our team directly through the chat box. And we will have time at the end of this presentation to answer a few questions. So please use the Q&A button to submit them, and you can submit them as they come up. Finally, we're live streaming this briefing on Facebook, and we'll be recording the event and sending it out, in addition with links to the report and resources shortly after this webinar. I know some of you are familiar with Dayenu, some of you have worked closely with us. For those of you who are new, just a little bit, we launched Dayenu in 2020 to build a multi-generational Jewish movement that's confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold collective action. And we pursue climate action that's at the scale that science and justice demand. So this means advocating for climate policies at the federal and state levels, urging candidates and elected officials to take bold action, and working to end the era of fossil fuels so we can build a clean energy future for all people for generations to come. So Dayenu also supports Jews and Jewish communities to confront the reality of the climate crisis on an emotional and spiritual level, and to grapple with some of the deep existential questions that the climate crisis raises. And we do this through workshops and teachings that are grounded in Jewish wisdom and Jewish experience and draw on climate Torah and Jewish music and arts. And critically, we're building the Jewish climate movement by supporting a growing network of nearly 100 Dayenu circles. These are small groups of Jewish climate organizers across the country, right now in 27 states. They're often based in synagogues or hillels, some even in neighborhoods. And we run strategic campaigns to give American Jews meaningful ways to take systemic action on climate. And we support young Jews through programs like Taking Down Goliath, our young adult climate organizing training, through which we've trained hundreds of Jewish climate activists ages 18 to 32. Beyond the grassroots, we also work in partnership with Jewish organizations and with multi-faith organizations and secular climate organizations. I think in our 2.5 years, we've partnered with about 160 different organizations. And today's briefing is really focused on this area of work: how Jewish institutions can take meaningful climate action. So before I hand it over to my colleagues, Phil and Dahlia, to really dive in, I want to offer just a few words of Torah. You might be wondering why we named this report and Dayenu's larger effort, All Our Might. As you may know, All Our Might comes from the V'ahavta, a prayer of the Shema. And in the V'ahavta, we are told to love God b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol ma'odecha, with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. And some of the ancient rabbis, like Rashi in the 12th century, understood b'chol ma'odecha, all our might, to mean all our possessions or all our money. And though it may make us nervous at times, our tradition very much recognizes the power of money as an expression of our values and our commitment to God and our commitment to each other. And if we are committed to confronting the climate crisis with everything we've got, with our ode, with our moreness, with everything, we must use finance as a key lever to respond to the climate crisis. We also named the campaign All Our Might because, like the V'ahavta, this campaign is rooted in love. Love for our planet, love for our communities, and love for generations to come. I'm going to pass it now to Phil Ranyanu, Dayenu's Chief Strategy Officer, to talk a little bit about why we decided to publish this report.
Thanks so much, Jenny. It's good to be here with you all. So we're going to talk about the climate crisis, and we call it a climate crisis, not just climate change, because for the past century, we've been dumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in astounding quantities, and they are already wreaking havoc on communities and ecosystems everywhere around the world. All those excess greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have already warmed the planet by an average of 1 degree Celsius. And even with just 1 degree of warming, we're seeing devastating impacts, climate impacts all over the world and all over the country. Over the past couple of years, more than 100 million people, nearly a third of the US population, and I'm sure many of you on this call have personally experienced climate impacts, whether that's fires or floods or storms. This is here and now. And when we picture a climate impacted world, we can think of it this way. It's a planet that's getting hotter, that's getting wetter, that's getting more extreme. And a warming planet is a threat multiplier for already vulnerable people and communities. So in order to keep global temperatures well below the 2 degree limit that scientists say is compatible with life as we know it on this planet, we need to cut emissions rapidly by the end of the decade and reach zero emissions by 2050. Here in the US, we've emitted more greenhouse gas into the atmosphere than any other country in history. And we are well behind in cutting those emissions to levels that we committed to under the Paris Climate Agreement just a few years ago. But here's some good news. After decades of gridlock, and as a result of an unprecedented campaign with which Dayenu and many of you were deeply involved, Congress finally passed the first ever piece of federal climate legislation. The Inflation Reduction Act, while not perfect by any means, was signed into law by President Biden in August, and it includes $370 billion, the largest investment in clean energy, environmental justice, transportation, and energy efficiency in US history. It was a really big deal. The law will cut emissions by more than 40% by the decade's end, putting us on a pathway to zero emissions by 2050. So we have the science, we have the technology, and the public is on our side, and now we have federal climate legislation. Affordable, reliable, clean energy technology isn't niche, it's spreading far and wide, and emissions are already starting to fall. But here's the catch. Our window to address the climate crisis is short. Winning slowly is the same as losing. Getting only part of the way there, all the way to our goal, means warming will continue at unsustainable levels. In order to slash emissions, we need to do two things to really close that gap. One is to rapidly scale up renewable energy, and two is to leave the majority of fossil fuels in the ground and unburned. Fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, are the leading contributors to climate change. They're responsible for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and they also disproportionately harm the health of historically marginalized groups. Black, brown, indigenous communities, rural, poor, and folks in the global south who are more likely to live near resource reserves, in the shadows of a polluting drill rig or plant, or along the route of a pipeline. Fossil fuel companies have spent decades sowing doubt in climate science and blocking any kind of emissions regulations for obvious reasons. They want to continue profiting while avoiding shouldering the costs of climate impacts. Who shoulders those costs? We do. And despite knowing about climate change for many decades, the majority of coal, oil, and gas companies really haven't taken any meaningful steps to retool their core business, which is extraction. They haven't really been on the path to meet the clean energy future that we know is happening, is unfolding right now. Meanwhile, renewable energy continues to grow exponentially cheaper, outpacing the fossil fuel industry. So this is a dying industry. What's keeping them afloat? Readily available capital. That means loans, credit, bonds, underwriting from the largest banks and asset managers in the world. And the leading investors in fossil fuels are based right here in North America. So we've dubbed the 7 largest US banks and asset managers responsible for financing the vast majority of fossil fuel extraction the Schmutzy Sheva, or the Dirty Seven. Each of these financial institutions has committed to reach zero emissions in their investment portfolios by 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement. But there's no indication that they've done anything to make that happen. Right now, it's just words. So as the world transitions to affordable and readily available renewables, these investments actually represent an increasing risk to investment portfolios. you can see from this graph from Bloomberg, over the past 10 years, the market has increased about 11% per year. The coal, oil, and gas sector in the same period has gone up less than 0.5%. So over the past 30 years, if you had moved all of your investments out of fossil fuels and had a fossil-free portfolio, you would have outperformed a portfolio that included fossil fuels. You would have been ahead. Instead of financing dirty energy, investors could be a force for good. They could be phasing out investments in coal, oil, and gas and ramping up investment in the clean energy needed to power the future. But like many of us, banks and global asset managers need a little push. They're not stuck in the past. They're looking to the future, unlike the fossil fuel companies themselves, which are stuck in the past. But these banks and asset managers are slow to change, and they need to push from their clients and customers. This pressure has come in part from the 1,555 institutions with over $40.5 trillion in assets that over the past 10 years have committed to screen out fossil fuels from their investment portfolios. And these aren't marginal institutions, they're powerful. The MacArthur Foundation, Yale and Harvard universities, the New York City and New York State pension funds, and many, many more. And among that 1,500 plus institutions, more than 550 of them are faith institutions who have pledged to zero out their fossil fuels in their investments. Unfortunately, only a handful of Jewish institutions are among their ranks. The Jewish communal sector as a whole has a lot of work to do. We hold an estimated $100 billion in assets and have an important role to play in helping finance the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy if we can join the rest of this broader movement. By shifting Jewish communal investments away from fossil fuels and urging the world's largest asset managers and banks to do the same, we can help end the era of fossil fuels and build a just, livable future where everyone can thrive. So now I'm going to pass it to Dahlia Rockowitz, Dayenu's Washington director, to talk us through some of the findings in our report.
Great. Thank you, Phil. Today, we are launching a new public report entitled With All Our Might, How the Jewish Community Can Invest in a Just and Livable Future. And I know we've gotten a little ahead in our slides, so if you just want to go one back, that would be great. We want to admire the beautiful artwork. I'll keep on moving forward, but the purpose of our report, there we go, nailed it. Wanted to make sure we admired the beautiful artwork on the cover of our report, which was done by Saul Weiss. So thank you, Saul, for that beautiful artwork. So I wanted to start by talking about the two purposes of releasing this report. The first is establishing a baseline for major Jewish communal investments in fossil fuels, what we know to be the leading driver of the climate crisis. And the second is to provide a roadmap and robust resources for Jewish institutions to better align their investments with Jewish values and shift their financial support away from fossil fuels and toward clean energy. And the second point is paramount. We conducted this research to better understand where we're starting from, but what we really want to focus on is where we're going. This report is an invitation. Ultimately, our goal is to spark conversation and catalyze action. So now we're ready. Let's dig into a little more about the report. So Dayenu analyzed the publicly available records of the 4 major denominational movements, 20 federations and their Jewish community foundations, and the National Federation Body. And those were the largest federations based on population. All told, the federations, including this report, represent 80% of American Jews. And the last sector we looked at were Jewish foundations. And we looked at the 20 largest endowed American Jewish foundations. All told, this represents 1/3 of that estimated $100 billion in Jewish communal assets that Phil spoke about. And we selected this slice of the Jewish community for 3 reasons. 1 is because of their positional power. 2, because they hold significant investments. And 3, we were able to access their information through publicly available records. We reported our findings in aggregate. So when you look at this report, you're not going to see any one individual organization pulled out or numbers associated with one individual organization. You're going to see an aggregate because we recognize that it's on all of us. And with very few exceptions, frankly, all of us are invested in fossil fuels. So in total, the nearly 50 institutions we analyzed have $34.7 billion in assets, and what we estimate to be more than $3.3 billion currently invested in coal, oil, and gas. These are the companies that continue to extract and burn fossil fuels and pollute our atmosphere, heating our planet. But we believe that these investments represent an opportunity for Jewish institutions to help finance the transition to a clean energy future. And needless to say, this number is several times larger when we factor in all Jewish institutions. So let's drill down on the specific sectors. In looking at these numbers, I really want to emphasize something first, which is we use the median or midpoint rather than the average. And that's because we know that the average has the potential to show a skewed story, especially looking at a sample size like we did. So keep that in mind. You are looking at a median in this slide, not an average. So for our first portion of the Jewish community, we're looking at movement organizations. All told, they hold nearly $3.9 billion in total investments and an estimated $218 million in fossil fuels, which means they have a median exposure of fossil fuels of 5.66%. Next, we looked at large federations, including their Jewish community foundations and the National Federation Body. All told, these institutions hold $15.6 billion in investments and an estimated $716 million in fossil fuel investments, with a median exposure to fossil fuels of 5.51%. And the last segment of the Jewish community we looked at were these large Jewish foundations. The Jewish foundations included in this report hold $15.3 billion in investments and an estimated $2.3 billion in fossil fuel investments. And I want to acknowledge that there was a much wider range in this particular area in the total amount of investments in fossil fuels. So again, this is why we went with the median. This median for Jewish foundations was 5.50%. So I just shared a lot of numbers with you, but here's what I want you to remember. Jewish institutions are not alone. Most investors have some exposure to fossil fuels. This could be a direct investment or by investing in an index fund that also includes fossil fuels. All told, the market average is around 5.68%. Remember, most investors have some money invested in fossil fuels. So at a median of 5.54%, most Jewish institutions are already doing better than the market average. But at the same time, we have to reckon with the fact that the $3.3 billion of Jewish communal assets that were assessed in this report are currently invested in fossil fuels. And we ran the numbers. This would be the equivalent of 2.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere. To translate that into terms that you and I understand, that is the equivalent of putting 561,275 gas-powered cars on the road, or 6.5 power plants to run for an entire year. And remember, this is just a third of Jewish communal assets, the ones that we analyzed. So instead, let's imagine the Jewish community was investing billions of dollars in clean energy and climate solutions. With a moral voice and an estimated $100 billion in assets invested, we as the American Jewish community are poised to take meaningful climate action. At the end of this presentation, you will have time for to submit your questions. We will do our best to answer as many as possible. So, you look down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A tab. Feel free to start submitting those questions. But I wanted to get a head start, and I wanted to try and address some common questions that we receive. The first one, Dahlia. We know it'd be nice to stop investing in fuels, but aren't there other ways we can jumpstart the clean energy economy? And the answer to that is yes, we already know, and thank you to the many Dayenu leaders, circles, partners, and allies who helped pass meaningful federal climate legislation. We know there's a lot of critical work happening in the Jewish community, but if we're looking specifically at just investing in climate solutions like renewable energy, electric vehicles, sustainable buildings, this is a great start, but will be insufficient, because experts estimate that for every $1 we invest in fossil fuels, we're going to need $4 invested in renewable energy to make up for it. So impact investing without also screening out fossil fuels is like undergoing treatment for lung cancer while continuing to smoke. We're continuing to dig the hole deeper. The next question we get asked a lot is, will screening out fossil fuel companies from our investments really have an impact? So we know that withholding the financing from fossil fuel companies need to operate is a critical lever to end the era of fossil fuels and confront the climate crisis. And it's not just about withholding the dollars and cents from these companies, but by raising a Jewish moral voice and telling the story of our efforts, we can affect change in the boardrooms and trading floors across the globe. That's because we have power. We have power as customers, clients, and sometimes even shareholders to urge the largest financial institutions to move their money out of coal, oil, and gas. And when we work in partnership with faith and secular allies, we can create a movement with the power to confront the climate crisis at the scale that science and justice demand. And for any of you out there who are representing your Jewish institution on this call, and you want to tell me that you have a fiduciary duty to maximize returns for your institutions, here's what I would say. For long-term investors, which is most Jewish organizations, frankly, continuing to invest in fossil fuels is a losing bet because renewables, as Phil shared, are becoming more accessible and they're becoming more affordable. Over the next decade, we know that demand for fossil fuels is going to plummet. Coal, oil, and gas equities are already volatile. And as the climate crisis continues to intensify, the inclusion of fossil fuels in your investment portfolio increases your risk overall. And as many of you may already know, screening out investments from your portfolio is actually something fairly common in the Jewish world. Many Jewish institutions already screen out funding from terrorist regimes, from firearm manufacturers, tobacco producers, and they're also proactively investing in certain sectors. So Dayenu has conducted this research in order to catalyze action, and we are here to support Jewish institutions to engage in this work. At the end of the day, this is all in service of turning the tide of the climate crisis. So in the report, we offer a roadmap, and alongside, we've created a robust set of resources to help institutions do just this, to screen out fossil fuels and invest in the clean energy future. We designed a 6-step process to cultivate buy-in and enable the Jewish community to take bold collective action. And like everything we do, it's rooted in Jewish wisdom. So you are looking on the screen of this roadmap, and you can see that every step is named with both a Jewish term or word or Hebrew word and an accompanying action that you should be taking. Step 1 is Reshit Chokhmah, beginning with wisdom. We want you to start this process by building a small core team to steward this work and get together for your first meeting to review these materials and engage in Jewish learning. And we actually created a tech study to accompany this work so that you can start off that meeting already with an agenda. Step number 2 is cheshbon, or accounting. We've already done some preliminary research on Jewish institutions, but we want you to research your own investments. You know best about your money, and this is a chance for you to immerse yourself and better understand how your money is invested in fossil fuels and where you might want to go from here. We provide a way for you to either do this research on your own, or we're happy to provide referrals if you want to engage an expert. Step number 3 is limud, or learning, educating your community. This is both educating the leadership, the decision makers in your institution, and the broader community, because we know that transformative change is never just top down or bottom up. We need to bring everyone along. Step 4 is really the heart of this work. Sicha, or discussion, engaging with your financial institution. This is a chance to work with your asset manager or with your financial advisor to explore your options. Not only will this enable you to align your investments with your values, and frankly, it's a chance for you to share those values with your financial advisor or asset manager, but it also demonstrates to those large financial players that there's demand for fossil-free funds and they need to get on board. Once you know that you are ready to move forward, step 5 is about kavanah, intention, setting a public intention and making your plan. And we know for some, this commitment will happen quickly. For others, it may take some time to come on board. You might have to schedule a few additional educational sessions and conversations. And when you make this public intention, some of you may choose to stay with your current financial firm and move your money to fossil fuel funds, and others may decide to change financial institutions. Ultimately, you decide. But what is critically important is to make this announcement public, because when we do that, we help to establish a communal norm, and we use our moral voice to call on these large financial firms to change. And lastly, the final step, kadima, or forward, moving your money and telling your story. We recognize that it could take years to actually move your money out of fossil fuels and ideally towards clean energy, but we think that it shouldn't take more than 3 years. This is change that can happen now and happen in the short term. And to maximize the impact of moving that money, we need you to celebrate and we need you to publicize the work that you do. So these 6 steps, which we've clearly laid out, we provide resources, we provide support, and we know this roadmap has the flexibility to work for any type of organization, but the specifics to help you really chart your course and understand what milestones you want to hit by when, and know that you're making progress. We have a whole set of resources that we are building out on our website that you can download and use. And we have, as I mentioned, a growing list of investment professionals, experts, and other institutions that have done this before or have a particular expertise who we can put you in touch with. I want to recognize that for some of you, you might be joining with a Jewish institution that may not have investments or significant investments. This could include a smaller institution like a synagogue or a JCC. We can support you no matter what, and we invite you to join this work, because what you can do is leverage your relationship with your bank to pressure it to move its money, for your bank to move its money out of fossil fuels. Again, you have a lot of power as a customer and a client. So stay tuned. In January, we are going to be launching our work focused on banks, but I will tell you now that this roadmap is adaptable for banks and for asset managers and investors. It works either way, and we really look forward to telling you next month about what that looks like. So the work ahead of us is clear, and the success of our collective efforts will depend on the following. I really want to end on what success will look like so that we can all start to envision what this will be in a short period of time. The first is educating, engaging, and mobilizing the Jewish community to take bold systemic action on climate. The second is moving billions of dollars in Jewish communal assets out of fossil fuels and towards clean energy. And last, maximizing our impact by leveraging our institution's powers at clients and customers to urge the world's largest asset managers and banks to stop funding coal, oil, and gas. To close, it's going to take all of us and all our might to confront the existential crisis that is climate change. But it is not too late. We have the opportunity to be a part of turning the tide of the climate crisis, averting the worst impacts of climate destruction, and building a clean energy future. We really encourage you to read the full report and learn more about the roadmap. We will very shortly have built out the website with that resource pack, but the report is right there for your reading. If you don't see it already, the link to our website where all these materials are housed will also be in your inbox after this call for you to access, but we have it in the chat as well. And we really encourage you to reach out to us. If you are affiliated with an institution that's ready to join this effort, and again, we are looking at institutions, we encourage you to email us at info@dayenu.org. We really look forward to working together, but right now we really look forward to answering your questions. So I'm going to pass it back to Phil for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dahlia, and thanks for walking us through the report. I see many of you are availing yourselves of the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, there are already more than almost 20 questions coming in, so I don't think we're going to get to them all, but seeing some really good ones here. I'm going to start with one that just came in that's about engaging with fossil fuel companies. So one of the questions that came in is, I've heard arguments for continuing to hold some fossil fuel investments and working through shareholder engagement to try to persuade fossil fuel companies to shift their business practices. Is there a pathway to holding on to some shares of fossil fuel companies so Jewish institutions can do that. And I'm going to kick that to Dahlia.
Great, thanks. Just in case you wanted a little more time with me. I think that's a great question. And I, myself included, assumes good intentions. And we would like to think that these fossil fuel companies can change, but for decades, they've really shown us who they are. And there has been a concerted effort in recent years, in particular, to try and use the shareholder advocacy and engagement to change the decision-making structures of these institutions and move them in the right direction. And what we've seen is very little progress, frankly. And so knowing that the window for opportunity is closing, we really feel like these companies had decades to make a change. They've been facing concerted pressure as of late, and we need to move on to a part of our advocacy where we really can see progress and movement. And in the case of these financial institutions, they serve their clients and their customers, and if they see that there's a demand for change, they will change. Unlike these fossil fuel companies who have a pretty set business model and have shown that they're, despite really fantastic marketing, in practice, they have not really moved all that much money or changed that much of their business practice to reflect the climate reality.
Thank you, Dahlia. Another question here, is there any effort being made by Dayenu to engage with other faith institutions to multiply the effect of our investment work? And I am going to kick this one to Jenny, if you want to turn your camera on and unmute.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, the answer is yes. There are many, I think you heard there are 550 other faith communities that have already done this, and many others that are in process. And we work very closely through a set of different multi-faith tables. And I think that, as has been said, raising up our voice collectively is also a big piece of how we make change. And so doing this in a faith context and doing this in a multi-faith context is very important and very much part of our strategy.
Thanks, Jenny. There are a few questions here that are related, that are about investing in clean energy, whether that's oil companies or others that are investing in clean energy, or folks in institutions that are using impact investing or other frameworks to try to bring more resources to the clean energy industry as this transition unfolds. As Dahlia mentioned, just to answer that question, as Dahlia mentioned, we need roughly $4 in clean energy for every $1 in fossil fuels. Right now, investments in new energy projects are around half and half. And so we have a long way to go. We need to do 4 to 1. That's definitely going to include huge amounts of investment, like we saw with the Inflation Reduction Act and the knock-on effects that we're going to see in the private markets as a result of those investments. But it's not enough to just invest in clean energy. There's lots of credit available for new clean energy and clean tech companies to get off the ground, to deploy, and we need to do it as rapidly as possible. We also need to be keeping fossil fuels in the ground if we're going to meet our emissions reductions. So we don't really see it as an either or. And indeed, many of the institutions that you're involved with, federations, foundations, and others, have really taken some proactive steps to fund the clean energy future. So this is one tool in our tool belt, but an important one that we feel like is important to be utilizing. We've got time for a couple more questions. Let's see. Dahlia, a number of folks are asking if we have specific investment advice or green funds for folks to invest in, either institutionally or personally. What can you tell folks about that?
Thank you. I will say that, well, my first caveat, and I think that is both being authentic and also for legal reasons, will say I am not a financial advisor, but I know a lot of financial advisors, or I have a lot of friends that are financial advisors. There is a wealth of resources that are out there. I saw someone in the chat mention fossilfreefunds.org. They have a list of noteworthy funds. And I will say that we can put you in touch with others who can give their opinion, but we as Dayenu will not be directing you in one particular direction. direction or another. But what I will say is, despite some exemplary funds that are out there, the rhetoric has not caught up with the action. I think this is why this engagement with these financial institutions is so critical. We need them to be creating new financial products and new funds, and frankly, better funds that are really stringent in their exclusion of fossil fuels. And so part of raising our voices with these financial institutions is saying, these funds are a good start, but they are not sufficient. We want more options and we want better options. So we can connect you with folks who can recommend some. There are some lists that are out there. And I will say that our job as advocates is to keep pushing for more and better.
And Dahlia, there's a number of follow-ups to that question if you want to come back to us here. That's about responsible investing, whether that's socially responsible funds, or ESG, so-called ESG funds, environmental social governance funds. Can you talk a little bit about the role that those play or don't play in the effort that we're pulling together here?
Sure. And I think that these conversations dovetail nicely, conversation around fossil-free investing and ESG, or environmental, social, or governance. Keep investing with those issues in mind. They dovetail, but they do not overlap. So again, you have a lot of agency. And when I say you, I'm really referring to institutions. I'm seeing a lot of questions come through about individuals. And I know a lot of this sort of sparks interest and excitement to think about your own finances. But looking specifically at institutions, institutions should be having conversations around where their values are and how they want to align them with their investing and with their finances. That may mean that that institution decides to pursue ESG. It also might mean that it's a totally different conversation, a separate conversation from fossil-free investing. So I think there's an opportunity for those to overlap. There's an opportunity for those to be separate. But what we're pushing is for Jewish institutions to look critically at where they stand on the climate crisis. If they have come out in favor of climate action, they should recognize that fossil-free options, making sure that they are not even inadvertently funding the leading cause of the climate crisis, is where they're specific to this work, where their focus and their priority is in mind.
Thank you, Dahlia. And I think we have time for just one more question. There are a number of questions here, Jenny, and I wonder if you can address these around not just how we're coordinating with other faith groups, but how we're planning to make maximum impact as a Jewish community. Are we pulling all of our announcements together? Are we going to roll them out over time? What's the best way that institutions that are interested in taking these steps can maximize their impact?
So I think that part of what we are doing in launching this now is that there is a lead up to shareholder season, which comes in the spring. So that's one kind of arc of time that can really collectively bring our power together. I also think, as Dahlia said, that this will happen over time. So there'll be institutions that very quickly are going to be able to make this change. Sometimes private foundations are able to move more quickly than, say, a federation. That might be a longer process. And I think part of what we're hoping to do at Dayenu is to be able to both support Jewish institutions to do this, and then be able to support Jewish institutions to leverage their power and their voice collectively. So you could imagine, for example, that if a few foundations are doing this around the same time, they can both be learning and working together, and also speaking out and raising their voice together. So I think it's going to happen over time, and there are going to be lots of opportunities to really coordinate and thereby leverage what we're doing. Because I think that that public aspect of really using our voice and our power is an important part. This is about moving the dollars, and it's also about leveraging our voice.
Thank you so much, Jenny. There are so many great questions in the Q&A. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. You're more than welcome to drop us an email at info@dayenu.org. We will get back to you as soon as we can. And I want to turn it back to Jenny to close us out today as we embark upon the Hanukkah season.
Thanks, Phil. We take your questions very seriously. As you see, I posed accidentally to the entire chat. We really will look at all of the questions that have been posed. It is very helpful for us to know how this report is landing. So thank you for that, and really encourage you to continue reaching out to us. We launched this report right before Hanukkah. Just a few days from now, we will celebrate Hanukkah. And we did that really to shed light on the climate crisis and the challenge that we're currently facing. And in the midst of a time that I think can sometimes seem very dark, to begin to light a way forward. In the Hanukkah story, the Maccabees recognized that they were not living in a tenable situation. And facing very steep odds, they took bold action so that future generations could thrive. And the Hanukkah story reminds us that as a Jewish community, we have the agency to make meaningful change. We have collective power. And Hanukkah is also about resources. As some of you know, we're called Dayenu, not only to say we've had enough with climate change, but also to say we have enough. We have what we need to secure a just and livable future for all people for generations to come. Our resources can last if we invest in a just, clean energy future. And this report is really meant to offer a step-by-step, candle by candle, if you will, way for Jewish institutions to recognize their power and to become part of building that future. So we look forward to hearing from you and working together in the coming months and years. And we wish you and your loved ones a Chag Urim Sameach, a light-filled Hanukkah. Thank you for joining us.
Ledor, vador, vador. Ledor, vador, vador. Ledor, vador. Ancestors sing from the waters. Ledor, vador. Children shout from the trees. Generations to come demand that we act now to heal the earth for all to thrive under the sun. Let